Hello, this is Deacon Joseph Swaden,
Mechanic.
and this is Orthodox Apologetics Live. We're live now, and we're here to take questions, have discussions on anything related to the defense of the Orthodox faith. At this point, I'm thinking we should create a tagline, like, we're the one show the Diamond Brothers are afraid of, or something. I don't know, but I haven't seen anything. Are you typing, Father?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The cops are trying to basically get out of the fact that they were involved in persecuting Patriarch Diodorus.
Okay. Expand on this for folks who have not been following the argument on the Orthodox Apologetics War Room and War Zone.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the 1980s, in the Jerusalem Patriarchate, one of their bishops was elected patriarch. His name was Patriarch Diodorus. Patriarch Diodorus was a very conservative figure, and he immediately led the charge and got the Jerusalem Patriarchate out of the World Council of Churches. All right? Jerusalem has always been a much more conservative patriarchate, so it had a lot of resistance to this to begin with. Patriarch Diodorus attacked and condemned ecumenism and modernism. He even went to Greece and even from what these articles are saying, and participated in some sort of a joint prayer and services with the traditional Orthodox over there. And it got to the point where the ecumenical patriarchate and the Coptic and Monophysite ecumenical delegates were trying to force Diodorus to engage in ecumenical services with them. And Diodorus replied that he would not do this, and that it is heretical, and that the Copts have to accept Chalcedon and all the councils. So what happened is they attacked him. The ecumenical patriarchate assembled a false council, and they condemned and deposed Patriarch Diodorus because he would not engage in ecumenical dialogue with the heretical Coptic Monophysites. And everybody, there was this one Archbishop Damianos in the Jerusalem Patriarchate that was persuaded to attack Patriarch Diodorus. He was surrounded and constantly harassed and attacked, all the while he was dying of liver failure and diabetes in these last 6-7 years of his life. Eventually, they supposedly made him sign some sort of a compromise in 94, 95. I'm not sure what it was. I think somebody told me that he had to sign some sort of a statement. Supposedly, I'm not sure what his mental state was if he was having this. Because when you have liver failure, you oftentimes have these periods in which your mind isn't too clear, if you know what I mean, because your blood isn't being filtered.
Well, it's worth noting that it was not just opposition that Patriarch Diodorus had to ecumenism. He actually began to reach out, and he actually had visitations from different old calendarist groups.
Yeah, in fact, he visited when he went to Greece. He would visit St. Cyprian and Justina Monastery.
So it's not so he wasn't just halfway there, just fighting from within.
He was deposed by the Fanner because he can celebrate with basically all calendarists. That was what they say. They say he had Eucharistic communion with them.
But he continued on, and the Russian Church abroad continued on, and
and what happened is, Diodorus was attacked and falsely deposed because he refused ecumenism with the Monophysites, and none of the patriarchates came to rescue him. This Ortho-Christian article kind of likes to they're kind of praising him, but as people have pointed out, it's also what they don't say. They don't say the fact that everybody betrayed him, all the other official groups. Diodorus was the only one willing to actually stand up for his conscience. So they hemmed him in, they surrounded him, they made him sign some sort of document in 94, 95. I'm not sure exactly what the document was. I know he refused to condemn Rokor. They had tried to make him condemn Rokor. He still refused to engage in ecumenism with the Monophysites. I think what they made him sign a document saying he would not try to open up parishes in Australia. I think that's ultimately what they were willing to do, because I think Diodorus had too much support in Jerusalem at the moment.
Yeah, and he was starting to get support from outside.
Because basically various Greek parishes throughout the world were willing to go under him because they respected him so much. But anyway, that didn't happen. You don't have to defend everything he did or how how he reacted with World Orthodox, whatever. But I'm just saying this is kind of what happened, and he was basically tortured and brutalized for the last 7 years of his life by those around him, except for a few, and by Greek ecumenical and Coptic ecumenical delegates and Roman Catholics who had every opportunity to try to destroy the man. They tried to force him into ecumenical prayer. He refused to say in Our Father with the Coptic and Roman Catholic delegates, and they got really angry at him. At one point, they tried to have him greet John Paul II at the Temple of the Anastasis, the Resurrection, the Holy Sepulchre. And he was, even though he was in horrible health, he forced himself out of the wheelchair to block John Paul from going into the church. And this simply just, I think what happened is that he was dying and he just thought, they can't do anything more to me at this point. And they kind of just sidelined him off. And my point on the forum is the cops like to talk about how they've been attacked and persecuted, but they've refused to take responsibility for what they did to this man. And they're just as much responsible as the ecumenical patriarchate.
And this is the dark side of ecumenism that we tend to forget.
Because all the people who talk about ecumenical love, that's not what it is. It's hatred for the truth. They hate people like Patriarch Euros. They hate people like Metropolitan Saint Philaret. They hate people like, exactly, they hate them. They have absolute hatred, and they mask it under laughs and jokes. For example, there was this one Coptic deacon who was putting laugh remarks, reactions, whenever I talked about the suffering of Patriarch Euros. He thought it was funny. And then he said, "Well,
he called him out on it." Then he said,
he got kind of sorrowful. Then he not sorrowful, but then he kind of backed away.
Yeah, and then it's like, it's hypocrisy, because then the guy was like, "Well, let's pray together for this old man." Well, no offense, why are you're literally defending the people who are attacking the old man? It's hypocrisy is what it comes down to. And I want to get to Atomic Lead's question, and then we're going to get back to this topic as well as our, lead topic, which is, of course, why do Roman Catholics not want to debate us? Atomic Lead writes, "Good evening, fathers. I hope you're not tired of talking about divorce, but I was hoping you could comment on the following interpretation of Christ's words. But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless she is already committed or is now committing adultery, in which case what I'm about to say doesn't make sense in those cases, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." Well, in this particular case, once again, he's writing, he's not writing, but he's saying this in the context of people who are divorcing their wives freely so they could remarry. And what he's saying is that that's a sin. If you don't have, a legitimate reason for divorce, such as adultery, or as I think we covered, attempted murder, the point is you don't have a reason to divorce your spouse, period. You shouldn't divorce your spouse, as a matter of fact. This is one of the problems that I have when dealing with the Roman Catholics. They like to say, "Oh, we frown upon divorce in every case." No, you have an annulment system that's basically the same as divorce.
Okay, so one of this Coptic reader said he washes his hands as having anything to do with Patriarch Euros. He doesn't care.
Okay, well, I don't know.
My point is, this is what you see with these people. This is what they really are. All right, when you back them into a corner, and because what we're arguing ultimately, I'm sorry to get on in the question you just asked. I'll let you continue. What I'm saying is that what you ultimately find is this: we're maintaining that both the Orthodox and the Monophysite leaders who oppose each other and wrote things were actually serious people. One was heretical and the other was not. All right. So the cops, by refusing to take their own people seriously, they basically devoid themselves of any real argumentation. All right. And that's the attitude of complete indifference to doctrine and dogma.
No, that's ecumenism in a nutshell.
Exactly, and that's what destroys the ability of people to convert when they don't believe there's anything to convert to.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
If you have a real sincere heretic who believes in a heresy, you can talk to them to get them to renounce it. If they don't believe there's anything such as rule heresy, or they have a so vague a concept. At that point, sorry, I got the cold. I got a flu. At that point, there's not much you can do.
No,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Father.
Oh well, okay. Just to get back to my point, when you're dealing with a lot of people like to put it in the papal versus Protestant model, where it's divorce, basically allowed pretty liberally, versus the Roman Catholics who say they don't divorce at all, even though in practice they do have a divorce system in the annulment system. What it comes down to is that Orthodox do not bless divorce. As a matter of fact, this is taken so strictly that I remember being told that in the Middle East, because they were so strict on this, that people would actually convert to Islam so they could marry multiple wives and get rid of the first one. So the point is that no, the tradition is that if you do not have a true reason, and when I say a true reason, I mean something that's serious like adultery, where you're violating the marriage bond, or attempted murder, or just a difference in faith, in which case you probably shouldn't have married the person anyway, and that's on you. The point is that you should not divorce. It's a sin. And this is if you are married, it is a mystery of the church. And if you violate that mystery, you're sinning. It would be like, I mean, I'm trying to think of like flippantly, doing a confession or doing something really sinful right after you've received communion. If you
For
violate,
example, if somebody enters into communion, does services with heretics, they're forbidden to do that as a clergyman, as an Orthodox priest.
yeah,
But if they do that, guess what? They're deposed. Now,
yeah.
does that mean we support we support? Oh, it was wonderful the deposition had to happen. No, but it had to happen because eventually there was no other way to protect the church at that point.
Yeah, because at that point you're diluting the faith.
Yeah, so something had to be done.
Yeah, so and that's in that sense, the church being the bride of Christ, you're kind of committing adultery right there. So, in any case, Sebastian Lopez asks, fathers, have you ever considered having a fellow Orthodox guest on one of your streams? Doing so could probably increase your viewership. Well, we open them up all the time.
All right, so they're basically posting funny memes at Patriarch Diodorus at this point in the comments.
Okay, then I'll just tell them they're going to be
something has to be done. They just can't. They said they're washing their hands, and then I said that's just like Pontius and Pilate. This is getting to the point where they're getting confronted with what they did to Patriarch Diodorus with the ecumenical patriarchate. I mean, and they refuse to take responsibility for it, and they like to talk about how they're not responsible for it, but they are. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to write, if Father Enoch bans you at this point, I won't stop him.
I mean, it's just Coptic. There's a Coptic deacon.
They're putting Archie memes up.
Yeah, there's a Coptic deacon named Alex Malik who basically I'm going to have to ban him. Yeah. Now, this other Coptic reader, he's actually been a little bit more reasonable, but this Coptic deacon, Alex Malik, who hid from us the fact that he was a Coptic deacon, basically finds the horrible treatment of Patriarch Diodorus to be a laughable thing.
Okay, so now to get to Sebastian's question, we have had people on the show. Whenever somebody wants to come on, they just have to ask us. And if you want to come on,
I'm just going to mute. I'm going to mute him so he can't post. I'm not going to remove him.
No, just remove him.
I'll remove him. Okay, fine.
He's making a mockery. He's making a mockery of Patriarch Diodorus, vegan.
Yep.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we talked to an Orthodox vegan. I mean, that's kind of odd why they're a vegan. I mean, if you're doing the fast right, you're a vegan half the year almost anyway. So
No, I should ask. Why are they being an Orthodox vegan simply? I mean, you can't really are they being a vegan because they think it's the orthodoxy, or they're being a vegan for other reasons?
Yeah, I mean, I remember one person who was early in apologetics back when I started. What the heck was his name? Thomas Valentine. He was an Orthodox Christian he was in the OCA, and he was he also, I think he was a vegetarian of some kind. So I mean, it's not that you can't enforce veganism throughout the church. But, the point is, if you're that's exactly the point. You can't, if you're fasting for your faith, then that's a good reason. If you're like saying that, we're supposed to not eat meat, you can say that technically they didn't eat meat in the garden, but we're not in the garden. Now, I will note this because there is I think it was St. John the Russian, not St. John the Russian, St. John the Romanian. Who in his he was talking about different levels of monasticism, and he talks about when there gets to a point where a person eventually, like a monk, can actually, they go from not eating meats to not eating fish to not eating. Eventually, they're not eating, fruits or vegetables, and eventually they're just literally eating the communion. So yeah, there's a point where I mean, if you're at the stage under that where you're just basically eating raw vegetables, okay, well, fine.
Well, that's called absolute xerophagy.
Yeah.
Absolute and complete xerophagy, which is in fact the original meaning of the word fast, by the way. When they talk about fasting in the ancient canons of the church, they talk about bread and water. Right. And then later it got expanded from bread and water, you could eat uncooked vegetables.
Right.
And then later what happened is they found that except for monks and some clergy and some laity, when you begin converting mass amounts of people could not
handle it.
Yeah, and so they began to say, well, you can allow fish on some days, you can allow seafood, you can allow some oil on some days, etc. Those are basically allowances that came because the strict fasting regimen was the original strict patristic fasting regimen was you didn't eat until after the 9th hour or even after Vespers on a fasting day, and then you only ate bread and water. All right? And then they began to allow gradually, maybe you could eat dates, maybe you could do this, maybe you could do that. For example, I think there was a document I was reading, a letter from the Patriarch of Constantinople to the Russian church back maybe the 1720s, and they talked about how in the Russian church they allowed like a certain type of fish during Lent or on certain days in Lent, but this type of fish wasn't allowed in the Greek church. I'm not sure maybe it was shrimp or something like that. All right. Like, for example, do you recall any distinct fasting rules in the Russian church about herring or something like that, or shrimp? That's not the same.
No. Well, I know that they even had caviar days, but it's actually
Caviar. Yeah.
In the Russian tradition, eating seafood, because it was less common, wasn't even, like shellfish wasn't generally eaten. So there was, it was literally much more like eating vegetables, and they were boiled. They are boiled, because they have they're very big on the oil rules, and so you have to basically boil your vegetables, and that's your food. But the point is that, again, so the later fasts are allowances, but how this ties into veganism is because, there's a whole, I study the vegans because whenever I'm doing fast days to see what kinds of things they've made that you can eat, but there's like a fat vegan movement to try to make vegan chunkier, like you eat more.
Well, now I should point out that if you don't balance how you do fasting rules in the church, you can actually gain weight during fasting periods.
Oh, absolutely.
Because a lot of the vegan stuff is heavy carbohydrates. I mean, theoretically, if all you ate was just meat or whatever, you'd lose weight because that's the whole Atkins experiment or whatever. Atkins or the Stillman diet.
Yeah, the ketogenic diet. Yeah.
Yes. So I mean, if you just ate cauliflower and broccoli, you probably wouldn't gain weight because those are complex carbohydrates. And
I will mention, because my wife is on the ketogenic diet, that technically you're allowed fats. So that's one of the things that it actually burns off. So you can eat ice cream with no sugar in it, so on and so forth.
Okay. Ice cream with no sugar? What is that even?
Yeah, sugar-free ice cream.
Well, what has to be? Well, for fasting, it can't have milk in it. Do they have?
Oh no, you can't. They also have. Well, they don't have a vegan sugar-free, but they do have Breyers has an almond milk ice cream, and so. But in any case, hi Basil, and hello to everyone that's been chatting. So yeah, the whole vegan thing, again, it's not fasting. Fasting is something else. This is one of the things that I actually talked about with my bishop. It was one time me, you, and Ladika John were at a buffet, and we started talking about this. They were making lab-grown meat.
Yeah.
And so, avocados, coconut milk, that's a good example. These are high-fat things that are technically vegan. Now, clean meat, lab-cultured meat, is basically genetically engineered meat that's made with cells off a living animal. It doesn't actually have you didn't.
Yeah, but it's still from a living animal.
It's still meat. That's the point. So if it comes from meat, it's meat, and if it doesn't come from meat, it's not. So
it's like there's been this plan in Monsanto and other big agribusinesses where they want to genetically engineer a chicken that has only a cerebellum, no brainstem. That has just a brainstem, no beak. Has it basically is just a big meat bag without feathers. So you have one tube for extracting the waste and one tube for putting the food in, and to just grow it almost.
That's
stupid.
Satanic.
I mean, it's still meat. It's horrific,
it's
evil meat. I mean, I know it's sick meat. But my point is that, just for example, if you had a machine that could take particles and reassemble them to make a steak from them, I'd still say that's meat. So if you had a replicator, from science fiction,
it's still meat. But the point is, they'd be like, that's okay because you didn't. But no, it's not okay. Not according.
Now, a real question would be, Father, if you go to a country like India, where a lot of people have only a vegan diet and such, sometimes they don't even drink milk. You have to, in fact, would you not, in fact, have to introduce the eating of non-vegan foods to even distinguish fasting periods from non-fasting periods?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the problem is that as we get closer and closer to people trying to create these meats in a lab, you start losing the concepts. It becomes, if you make it about the animal as opposed to about you're not eating meat, it becomes warped. And this is, I agree. Sebastian said modern day veganism is based on the belief that humanity is a cancer. I think the ultimate proof of that is if you look at what PETA's spokespeople, the people for the ethical treatment of animals, are saying. They're advertising cockroach milk, rat milk.
And you know what PETA people do when they actually seize? They've actually been caught seizing people's chihuahuas and putting them to sleep.
Yeah,
because PETA does not believe people should be allowed to own pets, and they put the dogs and the cats to sleep.
And right, they actually kill them. So
Exactly.
you know, it's insane. It's you know, kind of like kind of a socialism thing. I agree. All of the things you're mentioning are great. Also, wheat gluten is awesome for making, like, if you've ever tried the what was the Field Roast Company stuff, they make these great sausages that are made out of wheat gluten. So yeah, no, I agree. There's a lot of good stuff. I don't know why we're talking about this on a Thursday. We should do like a fast day show. Yeah,
well, it is a Thursday night, so
that's true. So you know, in some monasteries have already started fasting. So yeah, some dietary ideas there for today, Father. And so yeah, there's a lot of good suggestions here. You know, it's and let's not forget the original, which is, you know, falafel, the original veggie burger. Let's give a shout out to falafel because it's great, even though it is kind of high carb. So you know, for those who have to keep the carbs down, you want to go with the soy burgers. But in any case, Sebastian Lopez says, "Oh, fasting show would be good." Yeah, we just talk recipes the entire show, which might actually be not as as painful as some of the other stuff. I mean, you know, but we'll see.
I believe if you read the Conferences of St. John, I reread the conferences. In the Conferences of St. John Cassian, they talk a lot about, you know, the fasting, the spirit of fasting is spoken about. And I think they bring the point that fasting in and of itself is not a good unless it's directed to a good purpose. That and some people misunderstand this to mean, well, don't care about fasting at all. But what they're saying is that what use is it to fast, but to have hatred or to, you know, hold wrong teachings? All right. Are you fasting for the sake of trying to look prideful to others or not? You know, now, you know, like our Lord says in the gospel, those things you should have done and the others you shouldn't have left undone. All right.
Yeah.
So, for example, I think some of the Desert Fathers in the Conference of St. Cassian, and remember, although St. John Cassian and Germanus, who was his fellow traveler, wrote these conferences down, I don't believe they just made them up. They were recording the dialogues they had with these multiple holy elders in the desert. All right. And they talk about how many, and they talk about how many of these people would eat only dates from a fig tree, or figs, I guess, and drink water. All right, and maybe they would eat a little bit of oil on Pascha or something like that. All right, so that was kind of the strict regimen and such.
Yeah.
Now, what a problem happened when people came to Gaul in the early 400s. Having been in the Egyptian desert, and they began to say, well, the Egyptian fathers ate only figs. But there had to be problems because it was sometimes difficult growing figs in northern France. And so monasteries began to pay exorbitant amounts of money to import figs from Egypt. And so many of the monastic fathers in Gaul said, this is violating the spirit of what the Egyptian fathers did.
Yeah.
Because you're spending so much more money on importing figs than you could just find an equivalent fruit in your own country.
Yeah.
If you're spending, 10 times the amount of money, you could be using that money for other productive purposes in the monastery, for aiding the poor, without violating the fast rules at all.
Yeah. Now, now we have a couple of questions, so we're going to go through these and on the fast. And I think Basil asked, I think you've discussed this before, but does the Western Rite fast differ from the Eastern Rite? I think the proper answer is yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, in most forms of the Western Rite, as I understand it, some level of fish is allowed, whether a small fish that, of course, becomes debatable, and then eventually it's just fish. The biggest difference is that the Westerners have maintained, to some degree, the prohibition on eating until, as Machio Dobas pointed out, until the 9th hour, till 3:00. Now, technically, if we want to be like really like splitting hairs on the thing, the Russian Typicon actually does give instructions in doing the exact same thing, which is you're not supposed to eat until the 9th hour, because there's a difference between fasting and abstaining from foods. So abstaining from foods is what you do when the fast is done, because you're no longer not eating.
This is important during Lent, because the reasoning behind not eating until after really Vespers on a weekday in Lent is because there's a pre-sanctified liturgy in the evening. And you can't take
that leads right into Basil's question: should
Yeah.
one fast all day in preparation for an evening liturgy?
Yeah, see, that's the whole reason. For example, Abbot Alfred of Insham, in his sermons written around the year like 990 or so in England, talks about how it was a rule enforced. I don't know how well they tried to enforce it, that no man, even if you didn't take communion at an evening liturgy on, let's say, a Wednesday or Friday in Lent, he said you could still not even take the logia bread, that is the antidoran, if you had not fasted. All right, so that was even the old custom, that the first thing that you couldn't even take the eulogia bread unless you had fasted. Now that's kind of become more lenient in the past several hundred years about that issue.
Now, atomic lead, because we're going to go back up, and no, I'll answer the Jay Dyer question, Basil. Don't worry, because it's important now, and I'll explain why it's important. But I want to answer atomic lead's question. Speaking of falafel, do halal and kosher foods fall under prohibition of food sacrificed to idols? Technically, no. But the question is, kosher and halal, these things are kind of like, because they're required that, like, say, a Muslim or a Jew does certain things. He's not, they're not like sprinkling like Muslim juice or Jew water on it. They're just, they're just actually doing, they're just actually just making the food. A great example, I remember when a friend of mine ages ago, he told me that he was working in a kosher bakery, but he ran the register and stuff like that. But he also opened the store. And one day the boss wasn't there, and his boss, was Jewish, and the boss wasn't there, so he turned on the ovens, and so that would start the baking of the bread. And so the boss came and he's like, "Oh my God, you touched it! It's not kosher." And so he's like, "Wait, I've got a solution." And so he turned the oven off and then turned it on again. So,
now a lot of these kosher rules are not actually derived from the Pentateuch.
No, they're not.
They're actually expansions made by rabbis in the early centuries of the Christian era.
What's interesting is that there's actually, I'm sure it's like this with halal, but there are governing authorities to kosher which make a whole bunch of money off of getting that kosher stamp on various things. And so there was actually even a protest movement, some alternate certifying group that came out that claimed that, they're trying to create a monopoly or a cartel on the little kosher stamp. So no, I think most of this stuff is just paperwork.
The other point is, assuming they haven't put anything evil into the food of Muslim or a Jew, you do bless your food before you eat it.
Yeah, you're supposed to bless your food no matter where it comes from. So that should take care of that. And that's where the whole, again, St. Paul talks about not being afraid of eating.
Now, there is evidence during the medieval period that Jews and Muslims would do things to food they made if they were going to sell it to Christians as like a joke. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of some of the church authorities prohibited eating things made by Jews or Muslims.
Yeah, I think
they would in fact add like horse blood and all kinds of things if they were going to sell it to Christians as almost like a joke.
Yeah, but most of these things.
But I'm not sure if that's. Hopefully that's not going on.
It's not. Yeah, it's not. Now. Mostly now it's just a rubber stamp to get the kosher label or the halal label. In any case,
they call mavusha. What was it? You see the grape juice in this store. It's called mevushal for kosher.
Yeah,
or something like that.
But it's interesting because I could talk about kosher wine all day. Because of the
question. Like Mogen David.
Well, Mogen David's actually not terrible in my opinion. Manischewitz is the one that's terrible.
Well, maybe Manischewitz is the one that has a lot of. They add a lot of sugar to it.
It's made. It's like Robitussin without the actual drug. But the point is, but the point is that eventually even a lot of Jews got tired of it. They were like, we need to make some real wineries. So I personally I'm a big fan of Baron Herzog stuff. He actually makes wines that are they make wines that are literally regular wines, and then they just have Jews make the kosher versions of the wines, but they taste exactly the same. Yeah. And they're good wines. So I recommend those. But anyway, okay. Now, what do you think of Jay Dyer, and what do you think of the Diamond Brothers videos on the essence energy distinction? They don't seem to understand polymus or the doctrine. That's pretty much what got this channel started. We saw a really awful video where they were comparing the Jesus prayer to Hinduism, and that's really where we started kicking it up a notch. As for Jay Dyer, he's new in the faith. I've said my opinions on him. He's a young man. He's obviously very talented. He's in World Orthodoxy. I think it's a little bit of a jobber move to, I get money for questions. I don't think that's the right thing to do. But my biggest concern is that it seems like some of these trad Catholics are focusing on him One, because he has a lot of followers, which I don't realize most of those people are Orthodox. They're following him for the conspiracy theories and the movie stuff. But more importantly, I think that they want to see if they can get some kind of. I think they want to get him. The Roman Catholic apologists have like very few modes of operation in terms of their technique, and one of the easiest ones is the psychological one. And so I think that they would probably angle, and I'd love to be, a quick sparring partner for Jay before he decides to debate them, because they're going to keep egging him on. But basically, they're
also going to try to find quotations.
Yeah, lots of fast quotations.
And for example, here's my point. Saint Basil says the essence is simple, the operations manifold. And you have other fathers that talk about the simplicity of the essence. But then in the writings St. Gregory Palamas, he says the essence is beyond comprehension. Okay? And St. Gregory will say the essence is not simple in the way we understand simplicity, because simplicity, if talked about as a positive attribute, what he's trying to say is not describing the essence. All right? Like there's one place in St. Gregory Palamas' dialogue against the Barlamites where he says the essence is like something like absolute simplicity beyond even absolute simplicity's concept. All right? Yeah. So it's not a positive description of the essence.
It's apophatic theology.
Exactly. Right? And so what will happen is to say, oh, you say the essence isn't simple, but these other fathers say it isn't. Therefore, Gregory Palamas is a heretic. That's what they try to use. And so this is why I have to caution people who are doing apologetics that when we talk about divine simplicity, there is an Orthodox understanding of divine simplicity, and there's a heretical understanding of divine simplicity. All right? Divine simplicity in and of itself is not bad. It's just whether it's an Orthodox concept or an unorthodox. Just like the incarnation. There is an Orthodox understanding of the incarnation, and there are various heretical understandings, like the Monophysite of the Nestorian teachings about it. All right? So I think that, and remember when we debated, as much as it could be cold, that James fellow, he kept on continuously, when we were bringing up everything the Father said, he was like, well, that's not what the Father said. Almost like trying to gaslight us. It was like a gaslighting experiment.
Right, and it was, a lot of it was, this is what the fathers say. Well, which fathers? Well, this is what the fathers say. That's not debating. That's just, is gaslighting.
And then we were tempted, I think we may have asked, well, can you give us some of what the fathers say about John 3? Because he kept on bringing that up. Yeah. And he said, if you go to the Most Holy Family website and you read this article.
And he kept saying that. And if you're listening, James, honestly, that's never going to work. And if you or anyone else
he admitted he didn't even have the book they were talking about.
Yeah, so, it's kind of ridiculous. Thimer Mildred, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, asked, what jurisdiction does the Western Rite Parish fall under, Father? Well, we're under the Autonomous Orthodox Metropolia of North and South America and the British Isles. So we're Old Calendarist. We're Western Rite. To my knowledge, not even the Antiochians and the Rocor follow the exact same fasting rules, however. Even though
Antiochians don't follow the same fasting rules as we do.
They don't?
No, they don't. They allow meat during Advent.
Really?
They have some sort of fasting rule on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays and Advents, but on Tuesdays, Sundays, Saturdays, and Thursdays, they allow eating of meat.
Well, that makes no sense. Well, I know the Rocor ones don't.
Because a lot of the Antiochian customs are actually Roman Catholic things from the 1950s.
Wow. I didn't know that. Okay,
that's disappointing. And in the Rocor MP stuff, a lot of it's whatever they decide to do. I mean, they don't, anyway. You can talk to them if you want to contact them. You contact them, but that's what my understanding.
We just follow what the old priestism tradition is.
Basil says the Diamond Brothers are frankly a joke. They don't. Can you read that for me?
They don't understand the essence energies distinction or much of anything about orthodoxy. I would agree with you. They don't. And I think that the major reason why they don't want to come on any of these shows, why they don't want to really debate things, because, I mean, the first thing we saw was them trying to mix the Jesus prayer with Buddhism. They're not honest, but here's what's more important, is the fact that when challenged, we've now sent them 2 emails. Let me just check my email.
What do they do on the second Sunday in Lent when they're at the Greek Catholic parish and they're celebrating Gregory Palamas?
Oh, maybe they don't show up that week. I don't know.
Yeah, because technically the Ukrainian Greek Catholics... Under Joseph, I think it actually happened under Joseph Slippy. He actually promoted that. Whereas
I'm not sure. I think that those days.
I'm not sure if I think that's actually a 20th century thing. Putting Gregory Palamas. The Uniates doing him. The Orthodox always did it.
No, I'm saying I think that the Uniates were allowed, because even the Uniates were allowed to keep Six Seraphim.
All right, you're gonna have to find a Unia book from in the 19th century.
Yeah, you got to find an old Uniate book.
Go on Google Books and find a Uniate. What would it be?
Well, there would be almost none in English because of the fact that they didn't come until the late 1800s.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, but they don't understand innocence energy distinction, and the problem is this. I think a few days ago we had this discussion where there was a quote from St. Gregory Dialogus from his Morals on the Book of Job, and somebody said, well, how this could be interpreted to be kind of like an Aquinian mental contemplation of created objects. And the problem is that, if you look at St. Gregory's other works, like his dialogues, he says St. Benedict saw the Creator. He doesn't say he saw an image of a created image of the Creator. He says he doesn't say St. Benedict saw some kind of painted manuscript, whatever, a created mental observation. Mm-hmm. He literally says St. Benedict saw God. And then he says he in the single ray of divine light, he was taken up and able to see the whole creation, all right, due to the divine light, all right? So you have to interpret the fathers from their other works to begin with. So what happens is that this caused, in the post-schism period, this caused a lot of problems. You have figures like Aquinas who are now having to analyze John of Damascus, St. Gregory the Great, and other writers, and are confronted with what are, in their views, inconsistencies with scholastic Anselmian, that kind of developed theology, false theology. All right, and Aquinas simply says St. Gregory the Great was wrong. St. Benedict saw what they say he saw. He didn't really saw, so he didn't really see. And they have to radically reinterpret the earlier fathers. And this, in fact, created a reaction in parts of scholasticism. We had kind of like this Scotus. I'm not defending the Scotus. They're both heretics. Some of the Scotus begin to say, well, this is kind of too far. Maybe there is some sort of participation in God. And though they were still hamstrung by heretical, they couldn't ultimately accept orthodoxy because they were still hamstrung by their own heretical presuppositions.
Yeah.
So, so they had to radically reinterpret the older fathers and to fit them, or they had to deny them. They had to say that, these lives of the saints weren't written by them, or the Whitby life of St. Gregory, the earliest life of his, is not authentic. Just like the Diamond brothers and the Finneyite, who really, we're talking about the Finneyite in the 1960s, have to basically reinterpret all the fathers to suit the interpretation of Father Finney. And as Basil said, when James and others say the fathers, they really mean the Diamond brothers.
Now, okay, I want to jump here because I'm seeing a lot of comments about sedevacantism. I don't know how many present or former sedes show up here. If you're coming to Orthodoxy from there, we are grateful and glad that you found the true church. As for Atomic Lead's question, what do you think is a less defensible position for a Catholic, being a Sede or not being a Sede? And I hate to say this, but right now I would say that that's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And the reason for that is quite simply because Roman Catholicism is coming to its inevitable conclusion. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, it's what's happening is this. You either follow Roman Catholic theology to what it is and how it's been created when it was created by Hildebrand to its logical end, and that means you follow Pope Francis basically to damnation, or you try the Sede route, which is logically inconsistent because you're basing all of your theology around a magisterium that no longer exists. So the problem is that they don't know which way to go, and ultimately that leads to things like the Diamond brothers having to go to uniate churches and stuff like that. Because what ultimately, even if you have to separate from the main body of the Roman Catholic Church, you're still wrapped up in the idea of the Pope. You still have to, that's why they keep trying to elect popes and make new ones. So that's I would say that's the biggest problem that they have. So the question is, which is the better, a less defensible position for a Catholic? It depends on how seriously you take the teachings of the church. And if you take the teachings of the church seriously, then I'd say you probably have to come close to being a Sede, but you're going to find yourself logically inconsistent anyway. And the only way out of that is to come to the Orthodox Church. It's the only way out, because the system that Roman Catholicism created, where it is all based around one man and one office, is collapsing before our eyes. And that's your choice. You got it. And we say there's another option, and that's the option that was taken away from us in the West 1,000 years ago, and that is to become Orthodox, to become Orthodox, as they say.
Okay,
but
Thymer Mildred says, can you elaborate on the Old Believers' father? I think we've covered this, but the Old Believers basically are a schism, and I would argue a heresy that arose in the mid to late 17th century in Russia. And they initially were simply people opposed to liturgical changes, but they developed a whole ecclesiology which did not require there to be bishops in the church, which is, to say the least, problematic and heretical because it goes against the ecclesiology of St. Ignatius of Antioch and the early apostolic fathers that say where the bishop is, there the church is.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a bishop, if you're claiming to be the church, but you're saying there are no true bishops, then you're not the church. So what happened is they began to have all these elaborate explanations about, well, they have chrism from the old time. Now, some of them became more consistent, from their own perspective, they simply said the priesthood had ended. But that's still ultimately blasphemous also because you're denying the promise our Lord gave that the gates of hell would never prevail against the church. All right? Now, the other Old Believers began to try to convince priests from the official Russian church to join them, and they would baptize them and chrismate them, but they never give them ordination, and they that's ecclesiologically indefensible. And then eventually in the 18th century, the Russian church began to open up old ritual parishes and saying Old Believers could join. And they initially did this as a temporary measure, but then by the early 19th century, they realized that they had to make this permanent. And the Old Believers became so terrified that most of them would join the Russian church in the 19th century that they did everything they could to find somebody who would make one of their people a bishop. And so they convinced a man named Ambrose, who was a Greek bishop who was living in Montenegro, who does seem to have been mistreated by the ecumenical patriarchate. They kind of worked on him psychologically to make him, kind of come to the conclusion that, oh, well, I guess I can join the Old Believers or something. Now, even though there is some dispute about how they did it, because some people say that he didn't know Slavonic, and so when they were reading prayers over him, he just thought they were reading some sort of service or something. But they were supposedly reading prayers of reception or whatever. And this Bishop Ambrose, who joined the Old Believers, did single-handed consecrations. And that's kind of where the Old Believer hierarchy came from. And then another hierarchy was created in the 1920s when Renovationist bishops left the Russian church and joined the Old Believers and made some bishops. And then I think some of them left and went back to the Renovationists. And even today, Old Believers, you will find Old Believers in Russia that will go and they will find basically Ukrainian autocephalous. They'll find old Catholic bishops, and they'll just say, well, can you do an ordination? And they say, well, yeah, you're a heretic, but as long as you give us ordination, it's valid. And then they'll re-chrismate the guy who was just consecrated. So it's almost become the Old Believers, even though they're very supposedly strict, they end up behaving like the most vaganti old Catholic you can imagine. All right, not all of them, but some of them do. I'm sorry that may seem very harsh, but they're really.
Speaking of old Catholics, that gets to our next set of questions, because Basil asked about the Vatican I and the old Catholics. How was Vatican I received? This would make for an interesting video. Atomic Lead points out there were a significant number of anti-infallibilists, especially in Germany and outside of Italy in general. And of course, we have to throw in Overbeck in the mix because this is talking about basically ultimately what created Western communities in the world today. And so I don't know if you want to jump in on that, Father, or you.
Let me see. I'm sorry. Vatican II and remember
Vatican I.
Vatican I. I'm sorry. Remember, there was a controversy that happened in the Roman Catholic Church in the early 1700s. I believe it was in the early 1700s, in which the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Utrecht began to defend the Jansenists.
Yeah, the Jansenists being an ultra-strict version of the Roman.
They were basically a Calvinist version of Roman Catholics. That's essentially their soteriology.
Their soteriology was Calvinist, but their practice was actually stricter than it was.
Oh no, that's true. They were very ascetic, and but they still had more than ordinary heretical views, and they were supporters in France of them. For example, Blaise Pascal and a few others. Well, anyway, excuse me. So the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Utrecht sided with them, and I'm trying to remember. There was some controversy. The Pope refused to recognize the next successor, and they kind of became de facto separated from the Roman Catholic Church. And when Vatican I happened, as Basil points out, and Atomic Lead points out, there were a number of people in Germany, Austria, Switzerland that were what you might call anti-infallibilist, Latin Rite conciliars Roman Catholics. All right, Now, they got their bishops from basically the Utrecht succession, all right? Because they had no other ones willing to help them. However, a problem began to arise, and the problem was, what was their ecclesiology going to be? Because they had two options, well, a few options, but so they had one option was this: they could declare that they are the true Roman Catholic Church, in Vatican I, and Pius IX, who was the Pope during that time, whatever. They could say he was a heretic, and they could try to elect their own guy as Pope. All right. Well, they didn't choose to do that. Okay. The other option, they could unite. Well, they could unite with Orthodoxy. They could say, look, the Great Schism was wrong. They could analyze everything that was going on and see where it led, and they could unite with Orthodoxy. And that was what the Russian Church actually worked for in the 1870s. And the third option, which is ultimately what they chose, was they could embrace a form of branch theorism, that everybody who has apostolic succession and accepts at least the 7 councils are supposedly a part of the church, or the 6 councils, or the 4 councils, however they divide it. And that was kind of the influence the Anglicans had on them. All right. Now, and so this continued into the 1890s, early 1900s, when the Anglican kind of theory of ecclesiology eventually took root in the old Catholic churches of Europe by like 1910 or 1912 or something like that. All right. But in the previous time, in the 1870s, you had many Russian Orthodox figures like Dr. Joseph J.J. Overbeck, who was at what was called the Bonn Conference in the 1870s. And he was earnestly trying to convince the old Catholics that, look, your positions are untenable unless you join Orthodoxy. And at the conference, the Russian Church delegates had explicitly stated that they wanted the conference to be between the Orthodox on one side and the old Catholics on the other. No intervening parties, all right? Because this is what it's about, whether you're going to become Orthodox or not. Well, unfortunately, that's not what happened. Dr. Dollinger, who was never an old Catholic, he was a Roman Catholic priest that somehow always found himself instigating and putting himself into these circumstances. I almost have the suspicion he was sent there to cause problems. Collaborated with the Anglicans to invite the Anglicans, okay, who had no reason to be there. And as Dr. Overbeck points out, the Anglicans created all kinds of obfuscations and cover at the conference. And by the end of the conference, the Orthodoxy had not prevailed on the old Catholics. Now you can say, well, maybe it wouldn't have prevailed anyway, but it didn't help having other groups of heretics there trying to attack the ecumenicity of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. And of course, they discovered there was one former Anglican who had become a Russian priest that apparently was exposed at the Bonn Conference for being a heretic, that Dr. Overbeck exposed. And this led to all kinds of attacks on Overbeck. I think they tried to get him fired from Sandhurst, where he was a professor. The Lambeth Conference, like in 1880, actually attacked Overbeck by name. They complained to the Ecumenical Patriarchate and to the Kingdom of Greece to try to find some way to sabotage everything Overbeck did, in which they ultimately succeeded because they had a lot of money, the British Empire. So that's and now you still had some people in the old Catholics in the late 1890s, early 20th centuries that were kind of this conservative midpoint. They didn't really work out their ecclesiology, but they were kind of leaning to Orthodoxy, but they hadn't quite worked it out. I'm not defending that's a tenable position, but ultimately they were never able. Then you have the American old Catholics descend from them, and that all went crazy. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm looking at some of the questions. I wanted to quickly jump into this because I know that there's there's a lot to that question. The point is, Vatican I did cause a lot of chaos that led to some conversions to Orthodoxy. I think that's going to happen now. When you see Caitlin person, I guess you're a new you're considering converting to Orthodoxy, or you're converting to Orthodoxy. And you asked, have you had any experiences or stories of younger people converting to Orthodoxy? Well, I mean, I converted at I think 21. I think you converted younger than I did.
Yeah.
When did you?
No, I was baptized when I was 23.
Okay, so but the point is, I had been looking into Orthodoxy, but I wasn't, truly converted until I was 21 years old. But in any case, I know the experience of young people who basically, they become Orthodox and they keep that quiet because, to some degree, the world does not like when people convert to Orthodoxy, and the devil does not like when people convert to Orthodoxy, especially young people, because this is supposed to be the age where you guys are so narcotized and so completely taken by, you know, the wonders of technology. You're supposed to forget God, and the point is, you don't have to. And the fact that you are seeing the truth is something that is to be lauded. That said, it's going to be tricky, because the path forward, first off, because if you're not over the age of 18, you have to stay respectful to your parents, unless they're doing something that is horrendously sinful or something like that. You have to follow their rules. So, I mean, St. John Maximovich, at one point, when a young person who was considering becoming a monk, stopped eating meat, which he shocked his family. What's it called? At one point, the saint came up to the young man with a sausage, and the young man was shocked, and he's like, "Why are you giving me this?" And he's like, "You're going to eat it because your mother made it for you." And the key there is that you still have to be obedient, because remember, when we're Orthodox, that doesn't automatically give us the right to, like, declare against the civil authority or anything of the sort. The point is, so we're still under the order of our parents, and and the fact that they raised you enough that you are considering Orthodoxy, there's a little that's got to be given credit to them as well. So the point is, you have to. The best thing to do is to follow the rules of your house, continue to learn about Orthodoxy, and eventually begin to talk to them about it. Because if they see through your example the true Christian life, you might be coming in with them. So you don't know. That's what I would say. I would say have faith, and keep listening to our amazing show, because it's just great. Um, as for the Jay Dyer question, or the point that they are afraid, I agree. But I still think I would. I mean, if I was to, I would like to just, if anyone talks to him, before he tries to debate the Diamond Brothers, he needs to remember: stay calm, take one father at a time. Roman Catholic apologists are experts in throwing, because that's what they have, these little chunks of fathers that are incomplete. Um,
Watch out for ellipsis.
Statements. Right. Watch out for ellipsis, and more importantly, do not let them try to move up from father to father. Stick with one father, and you'll see that consistently those positions will fall apart. And so, in any case, Rambles777 says, "I'm interested in Orthodoxy, but I wouldn't tell my father about it. We had a conversation about praying to saints, and I tried to defend it, but he was very against it and called it worship. I probably wouldn't bring it up again, not anytime soon. But one of the things that, and this is funny, because I was taught when in the debates with, discussions with Matt Slick that I've had, this is the thing that kind of blows their minds to some degree. And what I mean is, that, what's it called? When you talk about saints, it's a little scary, and it's a little scary because of the fact that in the scriptures, we see Christ doing all these miracles. And in Acts, we see the apostles doing all these miracles. And that world of miracles, which is something that's kind of lost, even though Roman Catholics have saints, they're more usually like, any miracles that are attributed to them are usually like one or two, and they're years after their death. But the point is, in Orthodoxy, faith is a living experience. And so you do see people who are healing the sick, in rare cases, raising the dead. And the point is, they don't understand that. And that's where you have to get to, where you have to explain that the gospel is something alive. And I'm not saying explain that to your dad. Hey, Dad, the gospel is alive. Don't do that. The point I'm trying to make is, as you're reading things like the handkerchiefs of St. Paul, things like that don't make sense when you've completely rationalized your faith. So, in any case, let me see here. Someone asked if there were parishes in Texas. We have two. There are two parishes in our communion in Texas. One in Bayview, Texas, which is in South Texas, and one in Austin, which is in the center. That's actually at our sister church. Bishop Irenaeus Plock runs that. So those are the two I would recommend.
This Zitnon fellow, I'm actually in communication with him already. So
okay, so we've got a plan there. It's fine. And
the problem is that finding obviously, if world orthodoxy is really sparse out to begin with, true orthodoxy is even more difficult to find. Often.
We're like 10% of the Orthodox world.
Of the so-called, so the world Orthodox, whatever people count as the official population. So it's very difficult to find stuff. And unfortunately, I hate to tell people that you cannot wait for others to do something for you. All right? They don't like to hear this. You have to do something yourself. You have to try to, even if you're not going to be a reader, you have to try to help build things in your own location. Because a lot of people want to have a church building or a mission or whatever constructed for them already, but they fail to realize that happens because somebody made sacrifices to begin with. And if you're not going to make a sacrifice, then who is? If you're not going to try, you can say, well, I'm a failure. I'm a very sinful person. Well, we all are. And and I think St. John Chrysostom was reading one of his homilies. He talks about how people were proffering these things as an excuse for why they didn't want to do anything. For example, he says here in, I think it's homily, homily 32, he says, but they say, the people say, there is no comparison between the apostles and us. St. John says, I confess it too, and would never deny it. For I say not to themselves, but not even to their shadows are we comparable. Because their shadows even work miracles, like we know Father Joseph, right?
Yeah, exactly.
St. John Chrysostom then says, but nevertheless, let your part be done. All right? Now, what did our Lord say in the gospel? He says, after we've done everything we can, let's call ourselves unworthy servants. St. John says, but nevertheless, let your part be done. This will have no tendency to disagree with you, but rather to profit you the more. For when even to unworthy persons ye show so much love and obedience, then shall ye perceive the great reward. For neither are they our own words which we speak, since ye have no teacher at all on earth. But what have we received, that we also give, and in giving we seek for nothing else from you, but to be loved only. And if we be unworthy even of this, yet by our loving you we shall quickly be worthy. Although we are commanded to love not them only that love us, but even our enemies. Who then is so hard-hearted, who so savage, that after having received such a law, he should abhor and hate even them that love him, full as he may be of innumerable evils? St. John says, but the miracles, perhaps, are what ye seek after, and such as they wrought when they entered in, the lepers cleansed, the devils driven out, and the dead raised. Nay, but this is a great indication of your high birth and of your love, that ye should believe in God without such pledges. Because remember what our Lord says in the gospel. He says, blessed are those who have seen and believed. But blessed are those who have not seen. I think he says more blessed are those who have not seen and have not believed. So St. John in his own day was dealing with people when he was preaching in Antioch and in Constantinople that would have the exact same excuses that we always, myself included, are tempted to make, which is that we're not the apostles, we're not the saints, we can't be expected to do these things. Now, and the truth is, yes, we can't be expected to do miracles, but we can expect, as St. Chrysostom says, to do our part. So if people aren't willing, that's been the worst, that's been the real problem that Orthodoxy has faced. People aren't willing to do their part.
Well, and we're not going to, and we're not trying to push this, to convict anyone here. The key is what we want to do is if you're looking to begin praying along the lines of the way the Orthodox fathers do, get a prayer book, start the process, and have faith in God, trust in God, and we'll see. We're here to help. We'll try to see what we can do. If you can find something that's nearby, there are true Orthodox churches all over the country, at least in the U.S., and I know that in Brazil not so much. But we're working on it. But the key is, until we have people asking, we don't know where to go. So that's the key. If you're telling us you need more help in Texas, then we're going to get on the phone with Bishop Irenaeus and we're going to see what we can do. Throw out cities, throw out towns. Let's see what we can build. But the point is, we're here to help. And
someone asked about the book Atomic Lead. Speaking of people not to read, is Laurent Kleinerwerk's, or however it's spelled, his Broken Body, a bunch of nonsense. I've not read entirely the book. I've seen parts of it on Google Books. What is true is he does bring up a lot of interesting cases. Mostly the cases he brings up are about, for example, the schism between the supporters of St. Meletius and the supporters of Paul of Antioch, or a few of those types of cases. But the problem is that he tries to give that an ecumenical spin, whereas in reality, The schisms that did in fact transpire that were not real schisms between two or three or four legitimate groups of Orthodox bishops, nowhere in history are they not resolved within 100 to 150 years at most. All right. For example, I don't even think even more than 100 years. He tries to say, well, because Saint Meletius was a saint and he wasn't in communion with the Roman Church at the time of his death, and they were both considered to be part of the church. Therefore, this somehow extends to mean both Rome and papacism and Orthodoxy are part of the church. The problem is that he proves too much there. So,
Houston, Houston and Harrisburg. I don't know if you mean Harrisburg, PA, or Harrisburg, Texas. I know that Houston. Unfortunately, we did have Father John in that area, Father John Boylan, and I think he passed on, didn't he?
Father John Boylan? He had a stroke. Father John Boylan had a stroke.
But he's still alive.
Yeah, but he's had a stroke. He's not really.
He's not really active.
Yeah.
Okay. But that was very recent. I wish that you had maybe mentioned.
John MacArthur said, "I once went into an Orthodox church. They had no sermon, so the evidence." Did John MacArthur actually go into an Orthodox church, or did he? John MacArthur also said that the Orthodox do chrismation with an oily rag. I mean, I think he just makes this stuff up. I mean, if he wants to be evident and just simply claim the Orthodox are heretical because they don't believe in Calvinism, just go ahead and say that. Don't make stuff up.
We have people in Canada. I'm not. Is Kamloops in eastern or western Canada? As for Harrisburg, PA, I mean, we're in PA. I'm in PA. And Father Enoch's in New Jersey. So you're actually, in the Northeast, we have much better coverage. For lack of, I can't believe we're describing ourselves like cell phone service. But in any case, as for Kamloops, Canada, hold on, let me see where you are. That's south.
Yeah, MacArthur says the blood of Jesus is powerless. Exactly. MacArthur does not believe the blood of Christ has any actual intrinsic power. It's just symbolic of shedding for the forgiveness of sins. So yeah, that's true. MacArthur doesn't, like many of the Calvinists, does not believe physical matter can be endowed with grace by God. And that's something we've discovered with other debating other Calvinists, hasn't it been, Father Joseph?
Yeah.
I'm amazed at that because I grew up in my low church evangelical Protestantism, and we would have thought, well, there's power in the blood. We sang hymns like that, but apparently that's anyway.
As for Kamloops, that doesn't seem to be too far. I mean, it's closer to Vancouver, but it's not terribly far from Edmonton. Our parish, even though our Archbishop Joseph of Edmonton passed on, I believe our Father John still maintains the churches, and I think there is actually a mission church that's in Calgary.
Calgary in what's the province Edmonton's in Alberta? Is Calgary in Alberta?
I'm not sure if it's in Alberta, but it's close. I don't know Canada.
I think the missions are maintained within a 100-mile radius of Edmonton. So
so I mean, there's possibilities there. If you want to reach out to Father Enoch in Facebook, he might be able to help with that. As for New Jersey, as for Pennsylvania, what's it called? We can, the Pennsylvania guys, as I said, talk to FatherEnoch. Get on Facebook there.
We've been trying to start missions in Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
I keep on saying people contact me, and I have stuff on Facebook.
Stephanie, Father Benedict is in Central PA.
No, Father Benedict is in bad health, so he doesn't really do mass liturgy.
I think he might be able to still receive people, though. I don't.
Yeah, know. I think he can still charismate people and such.
Yeah,
but if that's not the case, we can always meet at his chapel, and I can do it. You know what I mean?
He's more than we're around.
Exactly.
We'll drive. As for let me see.
Flu says it's about 14 hours from Edmonton, Alberta.
That's a little far. I admit that's far. Again, we can try to put you in touch with Father John. We have another priest that's on a higher deacon, or is he a higher monk already? I'm not sure. I think he's a higher monk, but he's on the east coast of Canada, and that's I don't know he's going to travel.
Well, the Lazar, he's on the east coast of Canada.
But now let me see. Hold on, because I want to see if there's anything. I mean, even though we're not the only true Orthodox jurisdiction that exists. Even though I'm not a big fan of it, there are true. I know that groups like the Roco under Metropolitan Agafongal.
They don't exist. They broke up in America. So
they did.
Yeah,
that's right, because of Bishop Andronic. But the point is...
So Caitlin Jenner, for the first time, says, MacArthur really said this is sacerdotalism plus nothing else. Well, so what? Sacerdotalism means that there is, in fact, a ministerial priesthood. He's just making an accusation without actually proving what's wrong about it. The assumption is that this is the same argument brought up by Victor when he quoted what the Apostle Peter said in his epistle, okay, that ye are a royal priesthood, okay, a holy nation. Well, St. Peter was quoting Exodus, and immediately afterwards, the Levitical priesthood is instituted as well. So the quotation from the epistle of Peter, was it 1 Peter, is it 2 Peter, 1 Peter, that quotation does not prove that there is not, in fact, a special ministerial priesthood. Just like all the Israelites, according to God in Exodus, were a holy nation, a royal priesthood, they were still those who were the priest of the priest, who had ministerial appointments and ordinations, that sacraments that made them priests in a special sense. All right? Just like in the New Covenant, those who were members of the Orthodox Church by baptism and chrismation and the communion are members of this holy nation, this royal priesthood. We're the new Israel, but that itself does not deny the fact that there are bishops, there are presbyters, and there are deacons, all right, who exercise this ministry. And we have an altar of which those who do not accept our belief, especially the non-Orthodox, the Jews, etc., but have no right to take of our altar unless they become part of us. And remember what the Apostle Paul, St. Paul, talks about in Corinthians. He makes a comparison between the Lord's table, then the altars of the Jews in the Old Testament, and then the altars of the pagans. The tables of demons, the tables of the Jews, and the table of the Christians. The communion table is an altar. You see that the highest level of the communion of the altar is the Christian altar of the Lord's table, St. Paul says. Then below that is that of the Old Testament, the figure, all right? And then the lowest is the abomination, which is the pagan altar, all right? So if there is an altar, then there has to be a priesthood serving that altar, a ministerial priesthood. And I believe in the book of Jeremiah, it talks about the new priesthood and the new covenant, all right? In Malachi, it says that a pure oblation, an incense, will be offered to me. So this constant quotation out of context of St. Peter in his epistles, as if that somehow demonstrates there is no ministering priesthood, is ludicrous. It goes against every understanding of hermeneutics, every understanding of the early church fathers, and was invented only by the only people who ever invented those ideas. Well, I don't know, Bogomils came up with some stuff where they denied the priesthood, and then you have basically the Lutherans, and then those who followed them. All right? So we want all people to become part of the church. Yes, but you have to become part of the church. So,
well, and that's why we're looking these things up. I'm looking at the Hotka directory. That's under Metropolitan Demetrios of America.
Uh-huh.
They have some parishes in Toronto, Winnipeg, Manitoba. As I said, we have our own people there. There are some present. There's Quebec. Under the Orthodox. So there are true Orthodox churches. You have to look at their websites. You have to look which ones have representation in Canada. If you want to reach out to ours, just contact Father Enoch, and we'll try to find a way to get in contact with Father John. The point is, we can make things work, God willing. That's our job. If people tell us where to go, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I mean that's oftentimes one of the interesting aspects of missionary work and making a mission succeed. 90% of it is just showing up.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't think about it, but just showing up on at least a semi-consistent basis actually helps a lot more. Okay, so in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, it says, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Now, if you turn to Exodus 19, verse 5, it says, so verse 3 says, and Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called him out of the mountain, saying, so God is saying this. He says in verse 5, now, therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. In verse 6, he says, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. All right. Now, to me, that would seem to be important, right? I mean, so that didn't deny the fact that there was a distinct ministerial priesthood, did it? No, it did not. And I think if you go back a little further into maybe chapter 17. I'm going off memory here. God instructs the Israelites, some of the elders, to come up into the mountain, holy mountain of Sinai. So provide for the people. So hearken to the voice of his father-in-law, etc. He's trying to find the people, rest from the seventh day in the house of Israel. They took the journey. That no man. Okay. Okay, so the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid up before the testimony to be kept, and the children of Israel did eat manna 40 days. And all the congregation, children of Israel, and the people. I'm sorry, I'm just talking. I'm reading to myself to find. There's a specific reference to priests. See, there are some Roman Catholics, Protestants who argue, well, this verse in Exodus 19 is only in reference to before the Israelites broke the covenant. All right. So somehow they say, oh, they lost the universal priesthood and then it became only Levitical. But as I recall, there is a reference to priests and the elders coming up into the mountain of the Lord even before the committing of the sin with the golden calf. So I'll have to talk. If I can't find it now, I'll have to talk about it on the war room and such.
Well, I mean,
although of course, even that interpretation of somehow they lost that interpretation some Protestants try to proffer is still stretched. There's nothing mentioned or no context to it. It's something they invented. So,
well, all I can say is again, and I want to stress this because we were going to do an hour show and we're at like 9:40 already. Again, just as I said, keep in touch. We'll see what we can do. It's not. It's the point is. Granted, any person, any Orthodox person can do apologetics. We're in some ways fortunate because we're clergy. It gives us the ability to do more things than just discuss the faith. So if we want to, if you want us to help, that's our job, and we'll find a way to do it. As I said, if probably the best person to talk to on this would be Father Enoch, simply because if you're looking for directories, I can help with that. But if you want to see a mission start, especially, if you're in the Northeast, if you're in Texas, I still think you should contact Bishop Irenaeus there, Sebastian, because even though he's a bit far, the point is he is building missions in Texas. So I think that's really a good direction to go in. Wherever we can, we're going to do what we can to help everybody. Earlier, what's it called? What was I going to say? The Zitanon, I believe he mentioned Brazil, and it doesn't matter. The last time, Father Enoch didn't, Vladika, he made a trip, to the Philippines, and hundreds of people were brought into true Orthodoxy.
it was hot.
And it was hot. Yeah, they weren't really prepared for that. Experience.
That was the only downside. It was just it was a tropical environment, and we brought a European style vestments.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit
heavy vestments.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit concerned about the whole government in Mindanao thing, but we'll look.
Well, in Mindanao, you have the Muslims constantly attack Muslim separatists, and you have the communists, the Maoists having in the Maoist and the Islamic terrorists have been constantly involved in attacks. Continuously. For example, we hear about there was the Roman Catholic Church, which was bombed by the Muslims about a week ago or 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
But there was, I believe a few weeks before that, there were a number of soldiers at a checkpoint that were massacred by a bunch of Maoist rebels. In fact, when we were in the Philippines, we had everywhere we drove, there were at least 4 or 5 checkpoints. They just opened the door to see who we were, and they saw we were clergy, and they just closed the door. They weren't being, mean about it. I thought the Filipino people were extremely hospitable. I found, they were very nice, and they were always interested in religion. Even if they weren't Orthodox. I don't know if that's an aspect of their culture or of, I think part of it was the fact that they didn't have internet a whole lot, and a lot of the modern affinities. And I almost think that if you're deprived of constant internet and a lot of modern affinities, maybe you begin to think about more serious issues.
Well, yeah, but on the other hand, we have young people right here in this chat that are using YouTube.
Oh no! I agree. I'm not disputing.
Yeah,
as a culture.
As a culture, it's a good thing if you don't. But there's still people reaching through the machine, and we're in here too. So that's what we're gonna do.
Uh-huh.
All right. Well, this was a pretty good show. And we will be back. We usually end our shows on Thursday, try to focus on, the Saturday and the Sunday. We may do a show on one of these days, but most likely our show will probably be on Monday.
Now, if I would request out there, if anybody knows a place where I can buy large bulk of church incense, that's all right quality, because one of the problems we have in the Philippines is that the incense they make over there in the Roman Catholic areas is terrible. And
Even
they won't
the stuff in Manila?
Apparently, well, nothing's on the internet. They hardly have anything, and a lot of the local Roman Catholic people won't sell incense to us explicitly.
Wow. Okay.
So we're having a problem. Now we're having to buy incense and send it over there, which is not an issue. But if anybody knows of sellers of incense where you can buy large bulk and quantity and get because we can buy a box of incense at a local shop for $10 a pound, and I'm just wondering if there's anybody who knows something that I can buy something at larger bulk and maybe get it for $7 a pound or something.
Is it possible we could buy the gum Arabic and then basically buy the fragrances, and they could,
You mean to make the incense?
Yeah.
That's something to look into. But at this point, we're having. Basil says there's bulk incense on Etsy. Okay, so Basil, if you have my Facebook information, if you can just, when you get a chance, send some link to me so I can look at it. Because I got to buy charcoal as well. I mean, there's all kinds of. The problem is that in the Philippines, once the Roman Catholics switched entirely over to the Novus Ordo, they basically, the Roman Catholics, even before the Novus Ordo, only used incense at what they called a high mass. They didn't use that at a low mass, so they began to use even no incense later. Yeah. So it puts us in a position where we're having to ship incense to people.
Well, if we have to make it from scratch, we can. We'll figure it out.
I agree. Yeah. And there was one other point. Basil said, imagine intentionally being a Maoist. Yeah, I know. In fact, the Filipino communists attacked China once they got rid of Mao, because they were like, it's like almost how the Maoists complained once Stalin was dead and there was the Sino-Soviet split. So it's like the purity spiral of who is the purest Marxist and such. So, but they're violent. They will kill people, and then they're very you're stuck between Islamic terrorists. Even though Mindanao is a large island, it's the size of Kentucky. It's not a small place. Less than 10% of the population is Islamic, but they have provinces where there's a large Muslim concentration, and and maybe your average Muslim isn't violent, but even if 5 or 10% of them are, that's still a lot of people killing people. And then the Maoists constantly blowing up and attacking stuff. And there was supposed to be a ceasefire either earlier this year or last year between the Maoists and the government. But what happened is the Maoists broke it and they began killing soldiers. And so Duterte sent the army down there. And, basically, if they mess with Duterte, he's basically getting rid of them. So, I mean, anyway, you don't mess with Duterte. So.
Okay. And on that note,
okay. I'm not endorsing everything Duterte said, but I'm just saying that in other countries, if you start killing people,
he threatened to eat the terrorists, I believe.
Yeah, I don't support that.
I'm not eating them. Not me.
We got to convert the Philippines to Orthodoxy.
Hey, we started.
In America to Orthodoxy.
And whoever else will listen.
Yep.
All right. In that case, so we'll probably see you all next week. We may put up another update if we try to call the Diamond Brothers again. With a second call after our second email got no response whatsoever. We'll keep on pressuring and we'll keep on.
And if you aren't subscribed, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button.
All right. Well, in that case, thank you very much for everyone for listening. You have a good night. Father, benedicite.
Benedicite.